Aviation disasters. On May 24, while on a flight from Belize to New Orleans, both engines of the Boeing 737 failed. The aircraft couldn't reach any nearby airports. There were 45 people on board. Reconstruction of events. On May the 24th, 1988, morning, 10:55 a.m. The Taca Airlines liner departs from Belize, a country in Central America, to New Orleans, United States. The brand new Boeing 737-300 was delivered in January of this year and had only flown 81 hours. It joined the airline just 2 weeks ago. It is a new generation aircraft. Boeing named this generation Classic. It replaced the first generation Boeing original. The young captain, Spaniard Carlos Dardano, enjoys flying this state-of-the-art liner. Coming from an aviation family, he started his pilot career very early. At 29, he had already spent over 13,000 hours in the sky, which is quite a lot. 9 years before these events, Carlos had a serious incident. While preparing to take off in the wilderness in a small plane, he was shot in the head by a Salvadoran army sniper, losing vision in his left eye. It was challenging, but he proved to the U.S. aviation authorities that he could pilot a passenger liner with one eye, and they allowed him to fly. The first officer, Spaniard Dionisio Lopez, had slightly less flight time, 12,000 hours. They had encountered some issues on the same route the previous day. After flying from San Salvador to Belize, when they tried to start the engines again to fly to New Orleans, they couldn't. The flight was canceled, and the engineering service was called on board. It turned out that the new aircraft's batteries had failed and were promptly replaced. Overall, the crew was very enthusiastic about their liner. The pilots liked their capabilities. Auto-throttle, state-of-the-art navigation, autopilot. There was much they didn't have on the previous generation Boeing 737-200 original. Along with them is the airline's pilot instructor, Arturo Soleil, who is evaluating the new liner's performance. During the pre-flight preparation, the crew identifies a potential thunderstorm ahead of their route. After takeoff from Belize, they climb to 35,000 feet. The first officer suggests inviting passengers into the cockpit to demonstrate this marvel of technology. They start taking photos, clearly proud of their liner. The second pilot declares it's the best aircraft in the world, the best of the best. As they approach New Orleans, the pilot asks passengers to leave the cockpit and begin preparing for landing. Ahead of the locator, they see a wide thunderstorm front extending from left to right. Descending from 35,000 feet to 30,000, the crew enters the cloud cover. The engines switch to continuous mode, as is typical in such cases. Now the igniters will operate continuously to prevent flame-out and engine shutdown. The pilots also activate the anti-icing systems and request deviation from the dispatcher due to the storm. The dispatcher allows them to do anything necessary, just to inform when the crew resumes course for New Orleans. Carlos Dardano sees a dark spot on the weather radar. It's a gap between storms, and he heads for it.
The weather radar emits beams, reflecting back if they encounter water-filled clouds, painting them yellow and red. Typically, these are avoided due to potential thunderstorms and severe turbulence, dangerous for the aircraft. The radar's limitation is that it cannot show what's happening behind a storm cloud as the signal reflects back to the aircraft. Therefore, what's beyond the cloud remains unknown.
It's the crew's first time using the state-of-the-art radar, and no one explained its operation specifics to them. The dispatcher also doesn't warn about the danger ahead. When they entered the gap between storms, they realized their mistake. Another large storm lurked there, trapping them. Behind, the gap closes, and ahead, it's filled with solid yellow and red spots. 10 seconds later, they fly into the thunderstorm front. It starts shaking so much that instrument readings become indecipherable. Large hail and rain pound the windows. Lightning strikes the aircraft. God, help me get out of here, atheist Carlos Dardano thinks. 30 seconds of this ordeal sufficed to flood and stall both engines. They were certified to handle 4 times more water, but not hail. Hail was not considered in the design. All emergency alarms in the cabin lit up. Altitude 16,500 feet and 5 kilometers. With the engines disabled, electricity fails. Most instruments in the super-modern liner cabin go dark. Radio communication is lost, and Flight 110 disappears from radar screens. In his training days, Carlos Dardano's mentor taught him to feel a large aircraft. He would idle the engines, and Carlos would pilot the liner almost without them, gliding down like a glider. Now, with the engines truly out of commission, Carlos finds no difficulty in piloting. Nevertheless, this is the most serious situation of his career. At 5 kilometers altitude, he is without engines, instruments, electricity, amidst a snowstorm. All hydraulic systems are offline, and steering requires great effort. But a fresh battery powers a tiny altitude indicator, which they can use to fly. Carlos's top priority now is to gain altitude and maintain straight flight. A newly replaced battery will last 30 minutes. We've lost both engines, Carlos tells his colleagues, who initially don't believe him and think he's joking. He then moves the engine control levers back and forth twice and gets no response. Carlos focuses on piloting, while the second pilot and instructor attempt to restart the engines. They have no specific instructions or checklists for this situation, as it was considered unlikely in aviation for both engines to fail simultaneously. The pilots try to wind up the engines using the oncoming airflow, but to no avail. The liner continues to descend. At 3,200 meters, they manage to start the Auxiliary Power Unit, APU, a small tail engine. This means electricity is restored on board, instruments start working, and radio communication resumes. The dispatcher immediately offers several suitable landing options. Lakes, wide highways, fields, but none of these are reachable. He simply can't make it to them. But with the APU operational again, they can now try to restart the engines. The liner continues to descend. At 1,500 meters, the flight attendants were told to prepare passengers for emergency landing. At this point, instructor Arturo Soleil reports, "All okay, both engines are working." Carlos Dardano gives them thrust, but only receives a red signal indicating overheating and potential fire. The captain decides to shut down both engines. Altitude 1,100 meters. The aircraft emerges from the clouds, rain falling, surrounded by swamps. The crew has less than 3 minutes to find a landing spot. Carlos Dardano spots a small channel ahead. It was their chance. The second pilot starts reading the emergency checklist, but notices a smooth strip of land covered with grass to the right of the channel.
Captain, Captain, we land there. Yes, okay, that's a great spot.
But the plane is flying a bit higher, and they're not reaching that runway. To create maximum air resistance and descend faster, the crew releases everything possible: landing gear, flaps, and spoilers. The liner comes in full force. Losing altitude, the commander performs a wing slip maneuver. It's very effective and often used in small aviation, but never in airlines because it can lead to engine shutdown. The runway ahead, Carlos Dardano gently pulls the yoke towards himself, smoothly bringing the huge liner onto the ground. There's no reverse thrust, but Carlos manages to stop the plane within the assigned strip of land. Pilots discuss whether to start evacuation or not. The plane is intact, but there's uncertainty about potential fires due to intense braking. They decide to evacuate after all. The emergency exits are opened. Before the slides fully inflate, some women jump and land on the ground simultaneously. A heavy downpour begins. The captain looks out the window and decides not to leave the plane in such weather, as they still need to go through the final checklist. A dispatcher who worked that day recounts.
How did we find the plane? Coast Guard helicopters were already sent to that area when the small King Air requested takeoff from runway 36, right? I'd led them for climb to 1,500 feet. At that altitude, they were still under the clouds. We asked them for assistance. Naturally, they were more than happy to help us. Soon they reported that the Boeing 737 was standing near the factory, intact and undamaged. To say we were overjoyed is an understatement.
None of the 45 people were injured. The plane remained intact, and now the company faced the challenge of evacuating it. Initially, they wanted to remove the wings, load the plane onto a barge, move it to a more suitable location, and reassemble it there. But then someone mentioned that nearby was a NASA base of the American Space Agency, where they had an assembly shop. During World War II, airplanes were made here, and it turned out that the road near the base was a runway at that time. Test pilots were recruited to take off from it. The liner was fueled with a minimal amount of fuel, and just 13 days later, it headed for New Orleans. The plane was repaired, and for another 28 years, it flew with TACA Airlines and other carriers. The NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board of the United States, found no errors in the pilot's actions and concluded that the issue was with the engines. Recommendations were made to modify the design to reduce the likelihood of hail damage and to add additional drainage holes. After several similar incidents, instructions were developed for dual-engine failure scenarios. Pilots must now know them by heart.